21. Negotiate while advancing. The diplomatic war strategy. People will always try to take from you in negotiations what they could not get from you in battle or direct confrontations. They will even use appeals to fairness and morality as a cover to advance their position. Do not be taken in. Negotiation is about maneuvering for power or placement, and you must always put yourself in the kind of strong position that makes it impossible for the other side to nibble away at you during your talks. Before and during negotiations, you must keep advancing, creating relentless pressure and compelling the other side to settle on your terms. The more you take, the more you can give back in meaningless concessions. Create a reputation for being tough and uncompromising so that people are back on their heels before they even meet you. War by other means. After Athens was finally defeated by Sparta in the Peloponnesian War of 404 BC, the great city-state fell into steady decline. In the decades that followed, many citizens, including the great orator Demosthenes, began to dream of a revival of the once dominant Athens. In 359 BC, the king of Macedonia, Perdiccas, was killed in battle, and a power struggle emerged for his succession. The Athenians saw Macedonia as a barbaric land to the north, its only importance its proximity to Athenian outposts that helped secure their supplies of corn from Asia and of gold from local mines. One such outpost was the city of Amphipolis, a former Athenian colony, which, however, had lately fallen into Macedonian hands. A plan emerged among the politicians of Athens to support one of the claimants to the Macedonian throne, a man named Argios, with ships and soldiers. If he won, he would be indebted to Athens and would return to them the valuable city of Amphipolis. Unfortunately, the Athenians backed the wrong horse. Perdiccas's 24-year-old brother Philip easily defeated Argios in battle and became king. To the Athenians' surprise, however, Philip did not push his advantage, but stepped back, renouncing all claim to Amphipolis and making the city independent. He also released, without ransom, all the Athenian soldiers he had captured in battle. He even discussed forming an alliance with Athens, his recent enemy, and in secret negotiations proposed to reconquer Amphipolis in a few years and deliver it to Athens in exchange for another city still under Athenian control, an offer too good to refuse. The Athenian delegates at the talks reported that Philip was an amiable sort, and that beneath his rude exterior he was clearly an admirer of Athenian culture. Indeed, he invited Athens' most renowned philosophers and artists to reside in his capital. Overnight, it seemed, the Athenians had gained an important ally to the north. Philip set about fighting barbaric tribes on other borders, and peace ruled between the two powers. A few years later, as Athens was racked by an internal power struggle of its own, Philip marched on and captured Amphipolis. Following their agreement, the Athenians dispatched envoys to negotiate, only to find, to their surprise, that Philip no longer offered them the city, but merely made vague promises for the future. Distracted by their problems at home, the envoys had no choice but to accept this. Now, with Amphipolis securely under his control, Philip had unlimited access to the gold mines and rich forests in the area. It seemed that he had been playing them all along. Now Demosthenes came forward to rail against the duplicitous Philip and warn of the danger he posed to all of Greece. Urging the citizens of Athens to raise an army to meet the threat, the orator recalled their victories in the past over other tyrants. Nothing happened then, but a few years later, when Philip maneuvered to take the pass at Thermopylae, the narrow gateway that controlled movement from central to southern Greece, Athens indeed sent an army to defend it. Philip retreated, and the Athenians congratulated themselves on their victory. In the years to come, the Athenians watched warily as Philip extended his domain to the north, the east, and well into central Greece. Then, in 346 BC, he suddenly proposed to negotiate a treaty with Athens. He had proved he could not be trusted, of course, and many of the city's politicians had sworn never to deal with him again. But the alternative was to risk war with Macedonia at a time when Athens was ill-prepared for it. And Philip seemed absolutely sincere in his desire for a solid alliance, which, at the very least, would buy Athens a period of peace. So, despite their reservations, the Athenians sent ambassadors to Macedonia to sign a treaty called the Peace of Philocrates. By this agreement, Athens relinquished its rights to Amphipolis, and in exchange received promises of security for its remaining outposts in the north. The ambassadors left satisfied, but on the way home they received news that Philip had marched on and taken Thermopylae. Challenged to explain himself, Philip responded that he had acted to secure his interests in central Greece from a temporary threat by a rival power, and he quickly abandoned the pass. But the Athenians had had enough. They had been humiliated. Time and time again, Philip had used negotiations and treaties to cover nefarious advances. He was not honorable. He might have abandoned Thermopylae, but it did not matter. He was always taking control over larger territories, then making himself look conciliatory by giving some of his acquisitions back. But only some, and he often retook the conceded lands later anyway. The net effect was inevitably to enlarge his domain. Mixing war with deceptive diplomacy, he had slowly made Macedonia the dominant power in Greece. Demosthenes and his followers were now on the ascendant. The Peace of Philocrates was obviously a disgrace, and everyone involved in it was thrown out of office. The Athenians began to make trouble in the country to the east of Amphipolis, trying to secure more outposts there, even provoking quarrels with Macedonia. In 338 BC, they engaged in an alliance with Thebes to prepare for a great war against Philip. The two allies met the Macedonians in battle at Chaeronea, in central Greece, but Philip won the battle decisively, his son Alexander playing a key role. Now the Athenians were in panic. Barbarians from the north were about to descend on their city and burn it to the ground. And yet again, they were proved wrong. In a most generous peace offer, Philip promised not to invade Athenian lands. In exchange, he would take over the disputed outposts in the east, and Athens would become an ally of Macedonia. As proof of his word, Philip released his Athenian prisoners from the recent war without asking for payment of any ransom. He also had his son Alexander lead a delegation to Athens, bearing the ashes of all the Athenian soldiers who had died at Chaeronea. Overwhelmed with gratitude, the Athenians granted citizenship to both Alexander and his father, and erected a statue of Philip in their agora. Later that year, Philip convened a congress of all the Greek city-states, except for Sparta, which refused to attend, to discuss an alliance to form what would be called the Hellenic League. For the first time, the Greek city-states were united in a single confederation. Soon after the terms of the alliance were agreed upon, Philip proposed a united war against the hated Persians. The proposal was happily accepted, with Athens leading the way. Somehow, everyone had forgotten how dishonorable Philip had been. They only remembered the king who had recently been so generous. In 336 BC, before the war against Persia got underway, Philip was assassinated. It would be his son Alexander who would lead the League into war and the creation of an empire. And through it all, Athens would remain Macedonia's most loyal ally, its critical anchor of stability within the Hellenic League. Interpretation. Like Philip, you must see any negotiating situation in which your vital interests are at stake as a realm of pure maneuver, warfare by other means. Earning people's trust and confidence is not a moral issue, but a strategic one. Sometimes it is necessary, sometimes it isn't. People will break their word if it serves their interests, and they will find any moral or legal excuse to justify their moves, sometimes to themselves as well as to others. Just as you must always put yourself in the strongest position before battle, so it is with negotiation. If you are weak, use negotiations to buy yourself time, to delay battle until you are ready. Be conciliatory, not to be nice, but to maneuver. If you are strong, take as much as you can before and during negotiations. Then later, you can give back some of what you took, conceding the things you least value to make yourself look generous. Do not worry about your reputation or about creating distrust. It is amazing how quickly people will forget your broken promises when you are strong and in a position to offer them something in their self-interest. Keys to warfare. Conflict and confrontation are generally unpleasant affairs that churn up unpleasant emotions. Out of a desire to avoid such unpleasantness, people will often try to be nice and conciliatory to those around them, in the belief that that will elicit the same response in return. But so often, experience proves this logic to be wrong. Over time, the people you treat nicely will take you for granted. They will see you as weak and exploitable. Being generous does not elicit gratitude, but creates either a spoiled child or someone who resents behavior perceived as charity. Those who believe against the evidence that niceness breeds niceness in return are doomed to failure in any kind of negotiation, let alone in the game of life. People respond in a nice and conciliatory way only when it is in their interest and when they have to do so. Your goal is to create that imperative by making it painful for them to fight. If you ease up the pressure out of a desire to be conciliatory and gain their trust, you only give them an opening to procrastinate, deceive, and take advantage of your niceness. That is human nature. Over the centuries, those who have fought wars have learned this lesson the hard way. By continuing to advance, by keeping up unrelenting pressure, you force your enemies to respond and ultimately to negotiate. If you advance a little further every day, attempts to delay negotiation only make their position weaker. You are demonstrating your resolve and determination, not through symbolic gestures, but by administering real pain. You do not continue to advance in order to grab land or possessions, but to put yourself in the strongest possible position and win the war. Once you have forced them to settle, you have room to make concessions and give back some of what you've taken. In the process, you might even seem nice and conciliatory. Reversal. In negotiation as in war, you must not let yourself get carried away. There is a danger in advancing too far, taking too much, to the point where you create an embittered enemy who will work for revenge. Your purpose in any settlement you negotiate is never to satisfy greed or to punish the other side, but to secure your own interests. In the long run, a punitive settlement will only win you insecurity.